The rain had been falling for hours when Emily Carter stood barefoot on the front steps, one hand pressed against her stomach, the other gripping a half-zipped suitcase that had been shoved out after her. Inside the house, the lights were still on, the television still playing, life still moving forward as if she had not just been erased from it. Moments earlier, her husband Mark's voice had cut through the night, sharp and final, telling her to leave, telling her she was a burden, telling her the child she carried was no longer his concern. Neighbors heard the shouting through closed windows, watched from behind curtains, then slowly turned away. No one called the police. No one opened a door. Emily stood there, 8 months pregnant, soaked and shaking, trying to understand how a marriage that once felt solid could end on a porch with a suitcase and silence. How does a private promise fall apart so completely, so publicly, in front of people who choose not to look? And as she stepped off those stairs and into the dark street, unaware that someone was already watching from a distance, before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Because this was not the moment her life ended. It was the moment someone else noticed. Long before Emily Carter found herself standing barefoot in the rain, her marriage to Mark Carter looked like something solid, even admirable from the outside. They met in their late 20s, both ambitious, both convinced that hard work would eventually lead to comfort. Mark talked often about responsibility, about being a provider, about how a man earned respect by keeping control of his household. Emily believed in him. In the early years, that belief felt rewarded. There were plans, shared savings goals, late nights spent talking about the future they were building together. But when money tightened, something in Mark shifted. Missed promotions turned into frustration, frustration turned into rules, and rules slowly became commands. What he called discipline began to sound like correction. Comments about spending became lectures. Lectures became insults framed as concern. Emily stopped inviting friends over because Mark disliked questions. Phone calls with her family grew shorter. When she became pregnant, the balance tipped completely. The attention moved from partnership to ownership. Mark spoke as if the house, the schedule, even the silence belonged to him. Each month, his resentment grew heavier, fed by fear he never admitted and pride he refused to loosen. And then came the argument that no one expected, not even him. The argument didn't arrive as a single explosion, but as fragments that stacked on top of each other. Pieces of resentment Mark Carter had been carrying for months finally spilling out. Words were repeated, then sharpened, then thrown with intent. Emily tried to explain, then tried to calm him, then stopped talking altogether when she realized nothing she said would change where this was going. Mark paced the room, his voice steady in a way that was more unsettling than shouting, explaining his decision as if it were practical, unavoidable, even justified. He said this wasn't working. He said he was done. He took her phone from the counter, tossed it onto the couch where the battery had already died, and walked to the door without looking back. When it shut, it didn't slam. It clicked, clean and final. Outside, the night pressed in closer, colder, quieter than she expected. Emily sat down on the steps with the suitcase beside her, her hands resting on her stomach, waiting for tears that didn't come. Shock doesn't scream. It goes quiet. Minutes passed. Then more. The house stayed lit. The street stayed empty. And that's when headlights slowed down. The car eased to the curb without urgency, clean, quiet, deliberate, its headlights washing over Emily Carter as if measuring the situation before touching it. The man behind the wheel stepped out slowly, not rushing, not asking questions meant to soften the moment. He took in the suitcase, the rain, the way Emily's hand stayed protectively against her stomach. His voice, when he finally spoke, was calm and low, offering help without apology and without pity. He did not ask what happened. He did not comment on Mark Carter or the house behind her. He offered a ride, a place to rest, medical care if she needed it, as if these were practical steps rather than acts of mercy. Emily hesitated, weighing danger against exhaustion, then nodded. The drive was quiet. The man kept both hands on the wheel, eyes forward, stopping at a modest hotel with lights still on and staff awake. He paid at the desk, arranged for a doctor to check on her in the morning, left money on the counter, and turned away. No explanation. No promise. No name exchanged. He didn't ask her name. And that should have been the first warning. Emily Carter spent the next day replaying the night in her head, trying to understand why a stranger would intervene and then disappear so completely. It wasn't until later, through quiet conversations with hospital staff and a careful glance at the paperwork left behind, that she began to see the outline of who he was. The name attached to the payments carried weight, not the kind that announces itself, but the kind people recognize and lower their voices around. There was wealth there and influence, but none of it had been displayed. When he reappeared days later, it was brief and measured. He asked how she was feeling, how far along she was, and then, almost casually, asked about Mark Carter. Not with anger, not with sympathy, with precision. He listened more than he spoke, storing details, timelines, small inconsistencies. Emily sensed that every answer mattered, though she couldn't yet explain why. Meanwhile, Mark went on with his routine, unaware that his words, his decisions, his private behavior were no longer private. Phone calls were made that he would never trace back. Records were checked quietly. Patterns were noted. Whatever this man was doing, it was not impulsive kindness. This wasn't charity. It was assessment. What followed did not arrive loudly or all at once. It unfolded in small, deliberate movements that Mark Carter never connected until it was too late. Letters arrived first, formal and unemotional, requesting clarification about finances he assumed no one else had noticed. Then came calls from his workplace, questions framed as routine reviews that somehow circled back to his behavior at home, his conduct, his judgment. Stories Mark had told so confidently began to clash with records that told a different version. Dates didn't line up. Explanations shifted. Colleagues who once nodded along started to distance themselves, not out of outrage, but caution. Nothing about it felt like an attack. It felt like exposure, careful and factual, leaving no room for drama or denial. Emily Carter watched this from a distance, unsettled by how quietly everything moved. The man who had helped her never appeared at meetings, never raised his voice, never issued threats. His presence was felt only through consequences that landed with precision. Mark never knew who was responsible. He only knew that the ground beneath him was no longer stable. Power doesn't shout. It waits. By the time Emily Carter's child was born, the chaos that once defined her life had narrowed into something quieter and steadier. The delivery was calm. The room filled not with fear but with relief, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of control returning. Recovery was slow, but independence followed in practical steps. Legal protection in place, financial stability established, decisions made on her own terms. The man who had intervened never stayed long when he checked in, never accepted gratitude, and eventually stopped coming at all. Only later did Emily understand why. Years earlier, he had watched his own mother endure a similar silence, a similar dismissal, and he had learned then that responsibility is not proven by words or appearances, but by action taken when no one is asking for it. Mark Carter, meanwhile, lived with consequences that did not fade quickly: professional trust lost, personal credibility damaged, relationships altered beyond repair. There was no dramatic confrontation, no final speech, only the weight of choices settling into place. And as Emily built a life defined by safety rather than fear, the lesson remained clear and unspoken, a standard measured quietly and without applause. A man is not judged by how he provides, but by how he protects when no one is watching. In the months that followed, Emily Carter learned how quiet strength actually feels. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. It showed up in routines, in mornings that began without fear, in decisions made without asking permission. She rebuilt carefully, choosing work that fit her new life, surrounding herself with people who showed up without needing to be convinced. Mark Carter faded into the background of that story, not erased, but no longer central, his absence a reminder of how easily authority can be mistaken for character. From time to time, Emily thought about the man who stopped his car that night, not as a savior, but as proof that accountability can exist without recognition. She never tried to find him again. She didn't need to. What he had done was already complete. Years later, when her child asked simple questions about fairness and responsibility, Emily answered without bitterness, explaining that choices always leave traces, even when no one is watching. And that is where this story truly ends, not with wealth, not with punishment, but with a standard quietly restored, one life steadied. another diminished by its own decisions, and a reminder that power reveals itself most clearly in restraint, patience, and the willingness to act when silence would be easier.